From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's ahead. From Oklahoma State University, Derrell provides this week's remarks on the cattle market trends. He'll analyze the market signals from last Friday's USDA cattle on feed and cattle inventory reports. And Derrell discusses the trends in cattle trade between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada over the past 5 years and how U.S. beef interests have come out in that exchange. Then K-State's A.J. Tarpoff will take a look at treating cattle out on summer pasture for various health ailments, saying that you producers need to go the extra mile to assure that treatment products are administered correctly. Also awaiting Jeff Wickman with this week's 4-H segment. All that coming up on Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Glad to have you tuned in once more as we pick up on the cattle market trends and tap the thoughts of Derrell Peel, livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University. Derrell, we've much to cover here, including 2 reports from the USDA, which were posted this past Friday. A quick glimpse back to last week's cattle trade, though. The Fed side gave yet a little more ground last week, it appears.
Yeah, the Fed market, is still struggling a little bit. We think we're very close to sort of turning the corner, if you will, but particularly in the Southern Plains, we're still working through some numbers of cattle that are kind of holding this market back. I think the Northern Plains is in a little bit better shape from what I'm hearing. So it's we're just not quite there yet. And the other thing we have to keep in mind is as we clear this thing and there's some potential for this market to get a little more support, this is not the time of year when we expect a lot of support. Seasonally, fed cattle prices usually sag through, the end of July, into August, and towards Labor Day for a seasonal low. So, we have the ability, I think, to hold steady and maybe even go up a little bit. But if we do, that's going to be against the normal seasonal trend.
And anything in particular on the feeder cattle side that caught your attention this past week?
Well, I think feeder cattle markets in general are looking, somewhat stronger. And again, part of that's seasonal. The big feeder cattle typically are still going up through the summer here to a late summer peak. And we're kind of seeing that happen. But I think just generally across the board, we're seeing, feeder cattle markets in general holding somewhat stronger. And maybe that's a reflection, in a more broad sense of just the general tightening of supplies that we're seeing.
And a quick glance to the boxed beef trade this past week. How did it fare?
Well, boxed beef, continues declining a little bit from where it had been, but those were awfully lofty levels that we achieved, it's been now, 3 weeks ago or thereabouts. And so we've been declining a little bit off of that. And again, it's midsummer, so we expect a little seasonal weakness in boxed beef here for probably another 2 to 3 weeks. And then we'll have another little spurt of buying as we get ready for the Labor Day weekend, the last sort of summer grilling holiday. But all of that said, we're still at pretty good levels. So I think you have to keep this in context. We had such an unprecedented run up here, really, in boxed beef through the spring as restaurants opened up and as we rebuilt pipeline supplies in that food service sector. And once that was done, then we're pulling back a little bit from that. But again, holding at very strong levels, and the underlying implication is that beef demand is still very, very good.
Well, we've a raft of new numbers out from the USDA. Let's first take up the monthly cattle on feed report. And this, along with the cattle inventory report we'll discuss, both deemed rather friendly to the trades. How about the cattle on feed? What stood out to you?
Yeah, these reports are consistent in the idea that we are seeing cattle numbers tightening in the U.S. None of these were surprises. Both reports were pretty well anticipated. But cattle on feed for July 1 was down about 1.3% over this time a year ago. And really, that's pretty close to where it was 2 years ago. In fact, we're kind of past some of the worst of the 2020 disruption. So we'll actually be able to do the year-over-year comparisons, I think, for the rest of the year a little bit more safely. Placements in the month of June were down 7%. Again, the idea that we're working our way through the pipeline of cattle and into some tighter numbers. And marketings in June were up 2.7%. So all of that helps bring our feedlot inventories down seasonally as well as compared to a year ago. And I think it's worth noting that for all the struggles we've had in the fed cattle market this year, when we compare to the February number, which was peak inventory monthly that goes back to about 2006, we're down about 816,000 head since then. And that's about a 6.7% decrease from February to the July 1 inventory. So that's the real news in terms of getting these feedlot numbers under control and back under the capacity constraints that have plagued us so far this year.
And the likelihood would be that momentum will continue for quite a few months yet then?
Absolutely. You know, we've been sort of looking for this peak. Having worked through that peak number, I think we'll see smaller and generally tighter feedlot numbers, you know, not only for the rest of this year, but really for the foreseeable future going on into 2022.
And that brings us to the cattle inventory report and looking at the industry from stem to stern here. That was released on Friday. It's a semi-annual report. And it indicated once again that we see numbers pulling back, Derrell?
That's exactly right. Again, as expected, the all cattle and calves inventory in this report was 100.9 million head. That's down 1.2% year over year. The beef cow herd was down a full 2.0%, at 31.4 million head. Beef replacement heifers were down about 2.3%. So all of those things consistent with the idea that we continue getting smaller as an industry. When you calculate the estimated feeder supply, which we do from the inventories of steers and other heifers and the calves, and then subtract out the cattle that are already in feedlots, that estimated feeder supply was down 1.6% on a year-over-year basis. So that tells us that we've got reduced numbers coming towards the feedlot as we go forward.
This report, again, was taken as of July the 1st. Did it capture, in part, the drought-induced liquidation of herds that is occurring in many western and northern plains states, do you think?
You know, that's a little hard to tell at this point because, for one thing, of course, we don't get any state-by-state breakdown in this mid-year report. Mm-hmm. You know, I really think that we're probably not actually seeing a great deal of drought-forced liquidation yet. When you look at beef cow slaughter, it's been up significantly for the past 15 weeks or so, running up close to 14 or 15% above last year and the year before. But some of that may just be early culling because that's what we would tell producers to do if it's dry going into the summer. You know, maybe do some early weaning, get those cows that you're going to cull, send them to town now rather than later. So what we really don't know yet is how much of this is net additional drought-forced liquidation. I think that will become apparent as we work through the second half of the year, and certainly by the January 1 numbers, when we do get a state-by-state breakdown, it'll be more obvious how much liquidation, but we could certainly see considerably more drought-forced liquidation before the year's over.
All right. Well, you recently worked up an article on cattle trade between the North American countries, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, and calling it an increasingly integrated North American beef and cattle market. And over the past 5 years, you have numbers that show the dynamics. Talk about those, if you would, for a bit, Derrell.
You bet. You know, we've traded cattle as well as beef, but cattle is specifically between the U.S. and Canada and the U.S. and Mexico for a long time. One of the longest pieces of that has been the imports of cattle from Mexico into the U.S. Mexico has large areas that are really only suitable for cow-calf production, so they have a bit of a comparative advantage. And we've imported, the last 5 years, that's averaged about 1.2 million head a year of feeder cattle. And those tend to be lightweight feeder cattle that typically go out into the country into some sort of grazing program prior to entering the feedlots. With Canada, you know, over the last 5 years, we've imported just under 700,000 head a year. And it's a much more diverse picture there. About 73% of those imports are actually slaughter steers and heifers, as well as slaughter cows and bulls that come into the U.S. from Canada, go straight to slaughter. Only about 25% of our imports of cattle from Canada are feeder cattle. And so most of those are pretty heavyweight feeder cattle. Cattle tend to be bigger up north. So most of those would be cattle weighing over 700 pounds.
And how are we faring on our exports to same countries then?
You know, we've always been net importers, particularly from Mexico. We do export some breeding cattle and some other things, and a few feeder cattle in recent years, relatively small proportions. With Canada, though, the picture has changed a little bit in the last 4 or 5 years, and in particular the last couple of years. We've averaged in 2019 and 2020 shipping nearly 300,000 head of feeder cattle into Canada. So that offsets, not quite, about 40% of the imports that we get from them. And so that reflects the nature that, these are different kinds of cattle doing sort of different things, and some of it's geographically related east and west. The border between the U.S. and Canada is a long ways east to west, and a lot of times the transportation issues north to south make a lot more sense for both cattle and beef trade between the U.S. and Canada.
You step back and look at it from the long view. Is it a relatively well-balanced flow amidst the three countries then, do you think?
Well, I think, the market has become more integrated over time, and I do think it's becoming a more efficient, higher valued market for the entire continent, and it really illustrates the fact that, in a very real sense, we have not three separate markets here on the North American continent. We have one North American market for both cattle and beef.
Lastly, how do you think the markets will behave in this coming trading week, Derrell?
Well, again, we're still watching this fed cattle market, expecting it to have some chance to sort of break out of this, this overhanging burden of numbers that we've had. I think we're very close to that. Whether we can do it this next week is certainly up in the air a little bit, but I really think in the next very few weeks we will see that posture change a little bit. And I do think we actually have some potential for fed cattle prices to even move counter-seasonally a little bit higher here in the late summer period.
Your take on the market's always appreciated. Derrell, take care. We'll talk again in a few weeks. Thanks.
Look forward to it.
This week's cattle market commentary provided by livestock economist Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University. We'll be back on Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today and venturing on this segment into cattle health management once more, and things to think about in as far as responding to and treating health afflictions in cattle. Out on grass in particular, as we talk today, A.J. Tarpoff is a beef veterinarian, K-State Research and Extension, and this is timely because, A.J., at this point of the summer, several afflictions can strike our cattle while they're out there in the open.
We really do. We have several ailments we routinely monitor for and treat cattle for during the summer months. Unfortunately, generally, these cattle are not right close next to the house or next to the headquarters. They're out in summer range. They're out in summer pasture. What are, the ailments that I'm referring to? Well, foot rot, pink eye, anaplasmosis. Okay, most producers recognize these three types of diseases as we've been battling them for quite some time. Mm-hmm. Foot rot, we see the lameness, we see the foot swelling, we can see them from a distance. Pink eye, we can see the watery eyes, the irritation, redness around the eyes that turn cloudy over time. Obviously we pick those out, but we also pick out anaplas. They're lagging behind. They become anemic. They're obviously not doing well. They're off feed, all the way to actually getting a little bit violent towards the end stage due to the anemia. But regardless, our producers pinpoint these particular ailments. And one thing that is similar between all three of these diseases is we treat them with systemic antibiotics. Foot rot, yes, injectable antibiotics, so we get it through the systemic level to be able to treat it. Pink eye, the same thing. However, we might even be applying a eye patch to help with the healing and help take away some of the irritants with pink eye. And then anaplasmosis, yes, our mainstay treatment is injectable antimicrobial therapy, either with oxytetracycline or with the conditionally approved Baytril product that recently hit the market last year. Those are the two approved treatment methods for anaplas. So all of these obviously require administration correctly.
Hands-on,
okay? We have specific products that we have to use, and we need to treat these animals. Herein lies the problem. we're out in the range situation. We may not have the hydraulic squeeze chute, 10 feet away from this particular animal, let alone the handling facility. So it's not always that easy. And these are some real logistical troubles that we need to think through and have a plan in place to be able to implement when we find some of these ailments.
That's really at the foundation of our discussion today, putting together a treatment plan. And what are the main elements that need to be considered there, AJ?
Well, I think essentially getting our goals together, okay? And they need to be realistic goals. And ultimately, I think number one goal whenever we find these ailments is to have the proper selection of an antimicrobial, and you've had the discussion with your veterinarian under a valid VCPR, which is veterinary client-patient relationship, so you know what you're going to treat with whenever you find these ailments out in the pasture. So I think that's number one. So properly identified disease, proper therapy that's already prepared and ready to go. Number two is we have to dose it correctly, okay? We have to dose it and administer it to that animal correctly. And many times that has to do with cattle weight. And I understand that in some of these situations, we may not be able to run these animals across a weigh scale just before. But we do need to have an accurate average, at least, on what these animals weigh when they're out in pasture. So I kind of challenge all of our producers to really think about, how much do your animals weigh? When was the last time they've been across a scale? Or is your only reference some of your skinny cull cows that you might sell after preg check? That's not a realistic or of what the rest of the herd might look like. So I really challenge everybody to have a closer estimate of what these animals truly weigh, because we dose all of these antimicrobials by weight. If we can use weigh scales, that is the gold standard. That's really what we strive to do, but we do need to be as close as possible. One of the last ones is, if we do treat, we have to identify them. We have to record these. And this is part of the basic beef quality assurance, pre-harvest food safety. If we administer a product, we have to document that. We have to record that to make sure that they don't go to sale if they still have a meat withdrawal that they haven't met. And that's basic residue avoidance that we always have to put together. So those are our main goals, is prudent therapy, proper administration in the correct location. The correct location is in the triangle of the neck. I'm sure many of you are comfortable with that. In front of the shoulder, above the spine, below the nuchal ligament, a nice triangle on each side of the neck. If they're labeled for subcutaneous or sub-Q dosage, we're just underneath the skin, above the muscle layers, that will come in at a slight angle, be able to administer all that product just underneath the skin. Or IM, which is intramuscular. We're going perpendicular to the neck, directly into the muscle tissue underneath. Those are our two treatment areas that we're trying to get. So if we get it in the right place, at the right volume, to the right weight, and we've dosed everything correctly, that's great. But to get there, we need to be realistic on what tools do we have available.
And starting with how one will restrain that animal.
Correct. So, the logistics behind this is where it gets tricky. We might be in rough country. We might be very hilly or rocky. What equipment do you have available? Do you have a side-by-side? Do you have a horse and a rope? Or is it just you and your pickup and you got a cell phone? Okay. So, but this is the reality. When you find these situations, what can you do? So, some ideas for planning ahead. Do you have a catch facility or someplace you can set up some portable panels? That would be ideal. Obviously, we can use low-stress cattle handling and move those animals in a very controlled method to be able to get them to a catch facility and either treat them in that facility or have a makeshift facility where we can just load them into a stock trailer and be able to haul them maybe back to the ranch headquarters. Number two, obviously, hey, if you're pretty handy with a horse and a rope, that can be a very low-stress method to be able to capture these animals. Not always do we have to rope them and pull them somewhere. Many times we can just rope them and restrain them right where they are and have somebody else drive the truck and trailer straight to your location, where we can get them loaded with that horse and rope. And again, we can haul them back to a proper facility. Those are very, it may sound easy saying that, you can just do this. It can be difficult in some circumstances, and it takes a lot of talent and a lot of practice to be able to properly use a rope and a horse to restrain cattle.
Know your limitations there.
The biggest thing is understanding your limitations, understanding what your technique is, what you're good at, but don't be afraid to call for help. And this is where I work with a lot of producers, and I know many of us feel, well, it's my burden. I need to handle this myself. When it comes to some of these situations, don't be afraid to pick up the cell phone, to be able to call for help. Call a neighbor. Call one of the local folks, one of the local cowboys that does this, and we'll go out and to be able to restrain some of these animals for producers. So kind of have that, plugged into your cell phone or kind of prepared on, hey, if one of these situations arises, I can't get them in, I need some help, this is who I'm going to call.
Yeah. Good sound information and tactics all here, AJ. There is another device out there, and we want to spend some time on it, that's come on in recent years, and that is the remote delivery of product. Dart guns are referred to frequently. There may be some other methods, but let's talk about those and their practicality.
Yep, that's the last one that always comes up. It's like, well, Doc, I don't have to worry about restraint or anything like that. I've got a dart gun. And like you alluded to, there's multiple names, remote delivery device, you name it. They originally developed for wildlife, actually, to be able to dart and sedate wildlife in some locations. They've been adapted, for particular circumstances to be used in cattle production, namely in some of these unique situations where we have no other options. Now, dart guns, while they're convenient and they give an opportunity for a timely treatment, they do have their downsides. And I think it's important to have that understanding about the downsides of this convenience. And it's good to go through these things. I think first and foremost, most antimicrobials are not good choices for use through remote delivery or completely inappropriate due to administration location. Okay, so most antibiotics, either it's due to human safety, administration location, or volume, are not good choices to be able to go through a dart gun. So we're extremely limited on products that we can use through this device. Two is cost. Okay, oftentimes convenience comes at a major cost. And I just did some quick numbers and quick figuring. And depending on what you're paying for some of these products, we can be paying $65 to $95 per dart that's going downrange.
That adds up quickly.
That adds up extremely quickly, especially if one of those dart delivery systems didn't work properly. And if we have to follow that up, now we're in the hundreds of dollars just to treat one animal for one ailment. So it can become quite costly.
It turns out to be then more of a last resort if an individual has no other recourse for treatment?
We have to be realistic. There's a time and a place. There is a circumstance for the usage of these products. They're a tool in the toolbox, and I want to make sure I have access to every tool in my toolbox. That's always my goal. I don't want to demonize one thing or another, so don't misunderstand bringing up these concerns. It's for good reason. We understand that there's a need in some circumstances where all of our other options have been exhausted and it's not going to work. We still need to be able to effectively treat an animal given that circumstance.
We want to talk more about that approach to dealing with health issues in cattle on grass, and we need to take a break, AJ, so keep that thought, and we'll be right back. AJ Tarpoff, beef veterinarian, K-State Research and Extension, talking about cattle health treatment techniques for stock out on grass. We'll be back with him in a moment on Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today resumes now and picking up on our conversation once more with K-State Research and Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff. He's lending some thoughts to you cattle producers about contending with health troubles in your grass cattle and approaches to administering whatever treatments would be required for that condition. And A.J., we were talking about the remote delivery mechanisms out there and narrowing that down to what is commonly called the dart gun system here. You shared some hang-ups with that approach. What do the guidelines under the heading of the Beef Quality Assurance say about this?
So a little while back, the National BQA Advisory actually sent out a statement regarding some of these remote delivery. And there's inherently with the delivery system, there are some problems that need to be overcome. Some of the downsides, I'll just kind of briefly go through here. One is dosing. Do we have the proper weight? They're not restrained. They're out in the pasture. Do we have an accurate weight? If we don't have weigh scales, we're going to have that problem. 2 is the volume fluctuation. I mentioned that, yes, we're limited by the volume that we can fit in those darts. Okay, so we're limited by the product that we can use. But on top of that is we have inconsistencies of delivery. And what I mean by that is they've done some studies and done some work that even though the dart goes off and attaches to the animal, it may not actually inject the full volume. So we can have inappropriate or underdosing of whatever product we're administering. We don't know exactly how much actually got into the animal through that dart. So we do have some volume fluctuations that are a major concern. We also can't guarantee the injection site location. I know some of them have specific needles that help with this. They're shorter, might have different ports that the fluid volume can go underneath the skin. However, they are very inconsistent on whether they go subcutaneous or IM. And because of that, especially if most of our products are only labeled for subcutaneous administration, that if they go IM, it changes how that antimicrobial interacts with the body, which ultimately, under the beef quality assurance standpoint, may extend meat withdrawals. Okay, the voluntary meat withdrawal before that animal can sell. So 1, we don't know how much got in. It may change how it interacts with the body at certain levels. And then ultimately we might have to raise our meat withdrawal by using remote delivery. Another concern actually has to do with the injection site itself. Just due to the impact, we can have some issues with bruising, which raises some concern considering most of these darts are a non-sterile type of dart. They're physically filled. They're transferred, more than once from the original bottle. That can lead to some of these concerns. Okay, so we do have to be cognizant using new darts if we have to use those. They're not reused and things like that where we can potentially have contaminants. But the bruising, possible misplaced darts. If the animal moves, obviously they're not restrained. These are all a big concern. Ultimately, leading to potential of foreign body. Whether we have a broken needle, whether we have a dart that went too deep or anything like that, where there's a potential foreign body for the finished product when it finally goes to harvest. So those are the major issues. And because of all of these issues, it's big enough concern that everybody understands there's a time and a place. However, it's not the go-to recommended administration because we can't guarantee these things along the way. Okay, so that's understandable. So it's a good idea that if you're going to utilize devices like this and this remote delivery technology is, 1, make sure that you visit with your veterinarian, that you are choosing the proper product, that you understand, okay, do I need to extend my meat withdrawal? Am I using the proper dose? Am I using the proper product through this device? Number 2 is understand the mechanism itself, the remote delivery mechanism. They come in pistols or CO2 or air pump or 22 blank. There's a lot of options that are available. If you utilize one of these, make sure you are comfortable with the device.
Know how to load it, know how to fire it.
Know how to load it, properly load the syringe, understand how it fires and how to adjust the pressure. We don't want too high of pressure and we don't want too low of pressure. Both are equally devastating, okay? So we want to make sure that we're getting the proper pressure for the proper delivery at the proper distance. And how do we do that? Well, it comes with practice, okay? Most of these manufacturers sell practice darts to make sure that you are proficient at a specific distance with a specific dart of a certain weight, okay? So if you're going to be using a 5cc dart, you can practice with one of these practice 5cc darts so you're proficient. You know where it's going to hit at a specific distance, and that's what you work off of. The dart selection is critical. So, we dose by volume. So if you're giving 5 cc's, using a 5cc dart instead of a 10 is critical. They won't go off appropriately if they're not full. That's where going back to the labeled recommendations from the manufacturer is really important. But ultimately, it's down to the basics. We are still following beef quality assurance guidelines. And yes, we still have to hit the same injection site triangle. Just because it might be a little bit more challenging doesn't mean that we give up on that. Mm-hmm. It's still critical for post-harvest food safety and for the integrity of the beef animals that we are raising. We still have to give the utmost care, just like regular BQA injection sites. Okay, so one of the last pieces that I really focus on if these devices have to be used is follow-up. Just because the dart went downrange and hit the injection site triangle just where it should, it's time to wait around. Many of these darts actually stay stuck in the skin for a short period of time before the little gelatin cap melts and they fall out. Recover those injection darts. We don't want the potential of a foreign body for other animals to step on or to get stuck in your side-by-side tire or get stuck in a horse's hoof or anything like that. So it's worth the extra time to wait. Many times these darts will fall out in about 10 minutes. Just body heat works those little gelatin caps and the needle falls out. Recover those. It'll do a couple of things. One, for safety, like I discussed, but two, you can see if it was an inappropriate volume that actually went in. If only half the dose went into that animal, obviously we're underdosing. We're not going to see the effect of what we should. So keep in mind that these remote delivery devices come with great responsibility. Yes, they're convenient, but that convenience comes at a price, and that is, it is really up to us each and every time that if we have to use one of these, to use them appropriately, judiciously, under the advice of your local veterinarian, and above all, do no harm. Okay, that's always our goal, is to do no harm when we're trying to treat and care for the welfare of our animals.
It all revolves back around in the end, as usual, to good stockmanship and whatever delivery mechanism or method you're employing. Good reminder here and good advisories, AJ, as folks will be going about these activities likely for some time to come before those cattle come off grass for the season. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you.
Once more, he's been talking about numerous things to consider when treating cattle on grass with whatever health treatment is required for the situation. That's A.J. Tarpoff. He's a beef veterinarian, K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H offers more than 36 project areas for youth to explore. A recent high school graduate and incoming freshman at Kansas State University has taken full advantage of those opportunities. Adelaide Easter, the state president of the Kansas 4-H Youth Council, says that Discovery Days, held annually on the K-State campus, exposed her to the career possibilities in bakery science and food science. Adelaide, as president of Kansas 4-H Youth Council, you are very active in 4-H, and as part of that, you've learned a lot of leadership skills through 4-H, and it's really helped to get you prepared to go to Kansas State University, where you plan to do a double major.
Yep, that's true. I plan to double major in bakery science and food science, as well as double minor in business and leadership, and that is because of 4-H. Ever since I started 4-H, I've been very active. I've been in 26 projects, and I've had an average of maybe like 50 to 60 entries at each fair, which is super crazy, but I still made it work in my schedule. But 4-H exposed me to all of these different career pathways, and I found that I was really interested in bakery science and food science. Later, once I was older, after going to the fairs and having judging conferences where I learned lots of tips on how to grow as a baker, I ended up going to Discovery Days, which is actually held at K-State, and I attended a class with a bakery science instructor, and I got exposed to what bakery science even was. I had no idea that that was even a career you could pursue later in life. After that, I fell in love with the career, and I decided that I wanted to become as involved in 4-H with the bakery science program as I could. I've been able to grow a very close connection with one of the bakery science instructors there, and I just found out that he's actually my academic advisor, and he has helped me put together my class schedule. And I've already been able to have a relationship with him because I've seen him for the last 5-6 years at these classes. And he even has kids in 4-H as well, so he knows how much 4-H impacts us as we get older. I also decided to minor in leadership because when I started 4-H, I was a super shy girl. I did not want to be in 4-H. My mom had to drag me to the meeting. I wanted nothing to do with it. But I slowly broke out of my shell, and I decided that I wanted to become a leader. Flash forward to now, I'm the state Kansas 4-H president, and I have been on my district council. I've been all the offices in my club. I've been a leader in lots of different areas. And so I wanted to continue to grow as a leader because you can never stop becoming a better leader. And so I decided to do that by minoring in leadership at K-State.
So what were some of the specific things along the way that kind of helped you get better prepared to go to Kansas State and to feel like you're capable of taking on some of these leadership roles?
When it comes to my majors, fortunately with foods and nutrition and 4-H, that's probably one of the biggest areas and biggest projects that almost everyone is involved in. So there's lots of classes, there's lots of opportunities to meet with specialists that most likely work at K-State themselves. So I've been able to make great relationships with people that are already at K-State, so that when I go to K-State this upcoming fall, I'll already know and have these relationships made. And when it comes to leadership, I mean, K-State is the land-grant university for 4-H, so everything that we do through State 4-H, we try and make some connection to K-State. And so I've been able to get closer and understand what K-State all has to offer as a school, as well as see how they impact the Kansas 4-H organization.
Some of the project areas that you've worked on, how do they fit in as an overall picture, I guess?
I'm the type of person that I had a hard time deciding what I wanted to do in college because I was so interested in everything that was out there. I wasn't having a hard time to find something that I liked or I wanted to do because there were so many things that I loved and that I was so interested in. And I think that 4-H had a big part in me forming these realizations that I was really interested in everything. So even though I'm majoring in bakery science and food science, I still plan to be involved in leadership stuff as well as citizenship and doing my civic engagement in my community, as well as I still want to be involved in music theater because I love music. I'm very involved in performing arts, as well as any other project areas because I love all the projects that I do, whether it goes from space tech to photography to horticulture. I love growing in all of these aspects, and I still plan to continue to do that as I get older.
You were telling me that when you went to competitions, you looked for what you thought was maybe the hardest judge so that you could get feedback from them.
Yes. So maybe as I was growing up when I was younger, I didn't always want to go to the hardest judge. But my mom, she was like, no, you're going to go to the hardest foods judge. You're going to go to the hardest photography judge because they're going to teach you something. You may not get a purple ribbon. You may not get first place. You may get a red ribbon or a blue ribbon, but they're going to teach you and help you understand maybe why you didn't get the best ranking and help you grow so that when you come to the fair next year, you'll already have learned these different mistakes that you made.
So what kind of advice would you have for older 4-H members now as they work on their path towards college? What should they do to stay active in 4-H?
So I know a lot of people in 4-H that are older, they may be super busy with other high school activities and may think, I've done everything that there is in 4-H. There's nothing really else that 4-H has to offer me. And I would like to say that that's not true. There's many statewide events that you can go to, whether that's learning about legislation or going to K-State and getting to experience what it's like to live on a college campus, as well as explore the campus and go to different classes that you would actually take in college, or learning how to run for state council, which can help you when you are trying to get into college, which will look great on your resume, as well as learning important details on how to do interviews. But 4-H has many things that you can still do as you get older. Maybe if there isn't the specific project that is your interest, maybe you're super interested in entrepreneurship, which I know I am too. Since there isn't a specific entrepreneurship project in 4-H, there's also a self-determined project, which basically means that you can do anything you want that doesn't fall under the listed categories for projects. And you can still grow in that area and still find people that can help you grow in that area and help you become more of an expert.
Well, I know this is a busy time with county fairs and the state fair coming up, but somehow I kind of have a feeling that maybe you're marking the days down until you can get on the K-State campus because it sounds like you're ready to get here.
Yes, I am. I'm so excited. I'm very sad that it's going to be my last fair, but I'm excited for this next chapter of life that is going to be coming up.
That's Adelaide Easter, president of the Kansas 4-H Youth Council and an incoming freshman at Kansas State University. To learn more about what 4-H has to offer, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.